Yop, I was in China when this went down. Was actually in Wuhan, middle of January.
So everybody is starting
So,
to sign in now, Dale. So.
all right. Yeah, I'm seeing two on the screen, three, you, Yop, and Rob.
No, that's we got the
people.
attendees are all starting to show up now. Now that I've opened up the webinar. So we're going to let people just sign in there.
Oh, I see. Participants 20.
Yeah.
Got it.
So we'll let everybody just sort of get in there, get comfortable, grab a seat. It takes a few minutes for everybody to start joining at the same time. Looks like we're going to have a great attendance again. So we'll give it a couple more minutes. All right, so let's start. Welcome everybody again to the Oculus COVID-19 Resilience Guide webinar. I'm Mike Pownell. I'm one of the partners at Oculus, and really happy to introduce Dale Feinauer. Dale has been an instructor for a lot of the programming that Oculus has put on. We do our multi-day summits with really in-depth business training, and Dale has participated in that both in the United States and in the UK. But we also had our veterinary business school, a 3-year program teaching the basics of business, and Dale was one of our instructors on human resources. I'm particularly happy to have Dale on. As many of you know, I have my own practice. Not only do I work with Oculus, but I have my own practice. We have 13 vets, 30 support staff. And really what I got off of Dale years ago was a structure to put together to really get a good framework for our employees, from hiring to, review systems to compensation. Basically a lot of what I've taken is, is due to Dale. So I think instead of a presentation or a slideshow, what Dale does best is just talk about the situations. I'm going to let Dale introduce himself as well, but I've gotten a lot of questions from people. I went to a lot of Facebook groups and asked people what kind of questions they want to ask Dale. But at the bottom of your screen there, you're going to see the chat button and a Q&A button there. So what I'd like to ask everybody to do now, if you can just sort of write down what country you're from, it just helps us understand where people are, but also what your biggest challenge is right now that you're facing with the COVID-19. We're trying to understand that so we can have some webinars that and podcasts to deal with that. But if you have questions, we already have some preset questions, but just type in the Q&A button there. If you have a question, I'll be monitoring it. So if you see me looking over to my side, I'm just looking at the Q&A to see if there are any questions there. But Dale, I'm going to pass it over to you. People are going to get sick of just seeing two gray-haired guys talking, but I know the kind of information that you're going to have is going to be exceptional. So I'm going to pass it over to you and talk about, just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
All right, happy to do that as one of the other gray-haired people on the visit. Dale Feinauer, fundamentally an academic, did my undergraduate through graduate work at Ohio State, and 36 years ago migrated to the University of Wisconsin. Have been there teaching in the College of Business ever since. Teaching primarily in human resource management, general management, teams, quality, bankruptcy, change, family business, strategy, a wide variety of that sort of side of the house. I'm now the Associate Dean of the college and have responsibilities for running our graduate programs. We have an in-person and an online MBA. We have an executive MBA that works on the weekends, 16 months, international trip, get an MBA. And we're one of 3 campuses in the Wisconsin system that runs a consortium MBA, a fully online program. So I have responsibility for that and do a pretty good slug of consulting work. Have been fortunate enough to be able to work with the Oculus folks. So that sort of is my background. Enough about me.
I think one critical thing though, Dale.
I'd start, Mike.
I just want to, I think what it's critical for our people to understand is that you understand small businesses. And you've got a lot of experience with small businesses. So it's not like you don't know what the real world is all about. If I can be polite about that.
Well, yes, I'm not a particularly strong academic in the sense of doing lots of research. I've done some, but I spend most of my time in businesses. I serve on the boards of a number of family businesses of varying sizes. My wife is a fourth generation owner of a family business. Much of my consulting work is helping family businesses with various HR issues, helping family businesses with succession issues. I do a fair amount of how do you transition from one generation to the next, which particularly in say veterinarian pharmacy are unique issues because you need to have certain certifications and licenses to be able to operate those businesses. But I do spend a lot of time in business. I find business just endlessly fascinating. So yeah, it's a job, but more so it's a hobby that they just pay me to do. So
All right.
I'm a very, very fortunate person to be able to do something I thoroughly enjoy.
Wonderful. So before we get into the questions, do you have any just general thoughts about how people should be handling their staff during the COVID-19 crisis? And hopefully this is the one crisis we face in our lifetimes, but boy, we'll all learn some lessons now.
Well, a couple of observations, and I'll hit more about some of these as we go along, but every problem is an opportunity. So think about how this is an opportunity. Think about how people are going to learn out of this. They're going to be winners out of this. I mean, we've all seen, you know, the stock market, the grocery store chains are doing well, restaurants are doing poorly, but they're going to be winners and losers. There's going to be changes to how we do almost every business, veterinarian included, I'm convinced. I'm not bright enough to know what those changes are, but if we can view this as an opportunity, that's going to be useful.
Okay.
Open communication is, in my mind, key in any business. It's anytime, it's particularly critical now. There's so many unknowns, there's so much uncertainty, there's so much fear that the ability to have honest, frank conversations is particularly important. The other one, two others, one is limited expectations. Don't beat yourself up that it's not perfect. The university I work at, we went from having in-person classes to, in a 2-week window, everything moved online. And the mantra we kept having with the faculty was, it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to get it all right. It's going to be 60%, 80% if we're good, and we'll keep getting better. But if your practice is struggling in some ways, well, welcome to the new world, and change results in some struggle. There's some growth out of it, but don't feel like somehow, oh, gee, I'm screwing up as a manager because we're not firing on all cylinders like I would like. Then one concept that I kind of want to wrap a number of the things we're going to talk about today around is the concept of engagement. And a number of the questions were along this question of how do I keep people engaged? How do I keep people engaged, particularly in a working remotely or in this trying environment of the COVID-19? And I would note we've got some very good research on engagement, and we know that employee engagement is a function of 3 factors. 1, do I believe my organization has a bright future? So when I look at working for your vet practice, I'm a vet tech, I'm a vet, I'm an admin support person, whatever it is. One question I'm going to be asking myself is, do I perceive that this organization is got a future? Do I think this vet practice is in trouble? Do I think you're likely to go under? Is the organization going to really struggle? Or do I think it's got a bright future? Question number 2, do I think I have a bright future in the organization? So the organization may have a bright future. I think the organization is going to do just fine, but I'm really struggling to figure out my role within this organization. How do I fit? where am I going to be able to thrive, make a contribution, and meet my goals, whatever those are, which may be financial, maybe professional growth, maybe stability, but do I think this organization is going to meet my needs moving forward? And third, and I wouldn't underestimate this one, it sounds a little trite, but the research indicates it's critically important. Does anybody in this organization give a damn about me as a human being? Are there people here who care? And ideally, it's the owners. Are there owners of the organization? Do I really believe, if I'm working for Mike's organization, do I really think Mike gives a damn about me as a human being? Do I think he cares about whether my wife, my spouse, my husband, the kids, my parents are healthy or not? Or does it pretty much appear to me that this is a relationship where, all right, what am I putting into the organization? Is the organization making money on me? But no one here really cares about me as a human being. And that feeling that people in this organization care about me is in some ways the most important of the three. It's interesting, if you ask people, are you loyal to your organization? Do I feel loyalty to? Well, I've worked at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh for 36 years. I've had a good career. I've been able to do a bunch of things. I have a job that I thoroughly enjoy. Do I feel loyalty to the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh? No, not really. Not hardly any. Now, do I feel loyalty to some of the people at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh? Absolutely. Barb Rao, who's the current dean of the College of Business, I would go out of my way huge to take care of Dean Rao. Former Dean Al Hartman, former Chancellor Ed Penson. I can give you a list of about four folks that I feel huge loyalty to, because it's clear to me they've cared about me as a person. And my loyalty is really to other humans. It's not to nebulous organizations. Now, a university is a bigger thing than many of your organizations, but I think the concept's the same. People don't feel loyalty to entities. They feel loyalty to other human beings. And maintaining that personal relationship with your employees, balanced with the fact that you're not there to be their friend, you're the boss, and you have to walk that line. But walking that line is I think the most important thing in organizations. I'll tell you one story. I'm on the board of a company, a large manufacturing, reasonable sized manufacturing outfit, 300 people, heavy manufacturing. They make heavy equipment trucks, fire trucks, that kind of thing. And I heard a debate between the CEO of the business and the head of the union. And those two were debating whether one of the employees should be terminated or not. And the one kept saying, look, he's not doing his job. He's got to go. He's pulling down morale. He's not good for the organization. And the other said, well, but wait a minute. If we look at the union contract, I don't think we're at the point yet where we can, under the rules, pull the trigger. All right, typical conversation. What's surprising about that, Dale? The one who was saying, I think this guy needs to go, president of the union. The person who was saying, wait a minute, we got to make sure we're following the contract, was president of the company. They cared about each other. They had a kind of personal relationship where they could frankly and bluntly talk about what was good for the business in the long run, knowing that what's good for the business is good for the employees, and they didn't have to play roles. And I find that if you're really genuine as a human being, you can make that happen. So a few thoughts on that.
Wonderful.
Mike, question?
Yeah, so let's go into the questions then. And again, I advise people, if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A section. We've already received a couple of questions, but if anybody has questions as we're going along, just type them there, and I'll make sure that Dale answers them. So the first question, and I guess it's probably the biggest, the more overarching question, is how do we keep employees engaged and working towards our overall company goals when they have reduced pay, reduced hours, outside stresses? You know, everybody's worried about something right now, and legitimately so. So, I mean, that's probably the big opener question, but Thoughts on that?
Well, I would break this into a couple boxes. One, a box that's always there. You need to have a clear set of expectations, and you need to be holding people accountable to meeting expectations. So you may have people that are working remotely in some aspects of your business. You may have people that are still working in the physical clinic. But what are those expectations, particularly for the people that are working remotely? What is it you're expecting them to do, and how are you going to hold them accountable? One thing that I've seen a number of organizations do that seems to me work very well is for the remote working folks, you have a responsibility to complete a daily log. That every day you've got to complete a log, submit it daily or once a week that says, here's what I did on Monday. Here's what I did on Tuesday. So I will fill out at the end of the day today a document that I will at the end of the week email to my dean saying, here's what I got done today. And I don't view it as her keeping an eye on me. I view it as a way for her to be able to defend that I actually am working, and it gives me focus. It encourages me to be thinking about, well, what am I going to be able to say at the end of the day? What boxes am I really going to check? So I think those clear expectations and holding people accountable to meeting those expectations is important as it always is. Now, we've got some really unique, go ahead, question, Mike?
I was just thinking about that. I think the other good thing for that too is that if I'm the person who's remotely working, that's an opportunity for me to gather my thoughts, put into questions where I need support, where I need help. So it's not necessarily a one-way conversation.
Good point. Good point. And it's nice when you get comments back. So yeah. I have 4 or 5 staff that report to me, and I see their logs, and I make a point of reading those. And every week, each one of them gets an email from me at least once a week that is, oh, I see you did this. Well, how did that go? Do you need some help? That was a good idea. And I'm trying to encourage them that what they're doing is still being appreciated. I'm also trying to let them know, hey, you know, somebody's reading these logs. This really is mattering. This counts. Particularly in the current environment, I would note that this is not about the money. Now, I'm a fan of money as a motivator. I'm hugely convinced that in the long run, in the big picture, that you need to get a good relationship between performance and pay. Some people are motivated by money. They'll work hard in order to get money. Other people may not be motivated by money, but they'll be demotivated if they think the money's wrong. So if I look around at the other people where I work at the university and I think, wait a minute, I'm busting my butt, and these other people, they're half asleep at the switch. We're getting the same pay. That tends to demotivate, and you think, wow, why should I work so hard? So I'm a fan of money, and I'm a fan of money as a motivator or getting it right so you don't demotivate with money. But in the current environment, I'd shift a bit. I really think now is particularly a time where the other things become more important. If these are people that are working, and maybe they're working, 80%, they're working 4 days a week, so they've got a 20% pay cut, sure, that's going to create some strains and some stresses. That's a negative. But I think the key thing in terms of keeping people engaged and motivated is the attaboys, is the, hey, you did a nice job here. Let's talk about this. Showing concern for them as human beings is, in my mind, way more important than giving somebody a bonus in the current environment. In my mind, just isn't the thing that you need to do. It's the showing of appreciation, the building that relationship. I mean, hopefully you've got relationship with these people. It's more reinforcing those relationships in this challenging environment.
Well, I'm happy to hear you say that, because one of the things I've been doing is reaching out to all of my staff, not everyone every day, but throughout the week, out of hours, or, towards the end of the day, and just like, how are you doing? Like, is there anything we as a company can do to help you? Are there things, you don't have to tell me your personal life if you don't want me, but are there things going on that that we as a company can help you? And so far, the feedback I've been getting is fairly appreciative about that.
It's got to be, because when I'm feeling particularly isolated, when I'm feeling particularly scared about how things are going to go, knowing that there are people in the world that care enough about me to ask how it's going, that's particularly important. I think this is a huge opportunity, a huge focus for us now. Humans don't like the unknown, and let me address kind of that. You know, how do you motivate people with all the ambiguity and all the unknown? Humans hate the unknown. I think it's evolutionary psychology. It's a part of who we are as a species. We don't like not knowing what the future is going to be. That ambiguity drives us nuts. And there's huge ambiguity. You know, when is this going to open up? When are we going to get back to normal? What's the new normal going to be? We could go on with questions for the whole time we've got together. I think we got to think about how do we address that question of ambiguity in a way that's going to resonate with your employees. First of all, I would focus on what are the knowns. Let's remind ourselves of a bunch of stuff that we do know, and it is going to be true now. It's going to be true tomorrow. It's going to be true for the life of this organization. I guarantee you, if I'm working for Mike's organization, we put the well-being of the animal, of the horse first. That's very important. You do the right thing by the animal because it's the right thing to do. I have to believe that's part of the philosophy of what you do as an organization. This isn't going to change that. The way we interact with customers, the way we treat the owners of the pets or the owners of the horses or the cows or the what have you, we're not going to change fundamentally how we treat animals. We're not going to change how we treat customers. We're not going to change how we treat each other. We're going to treat each other with dignity and respect. We've done it all along because it's the right thing to do. It's still going to be the right thing to do. The mission, the vision, the values of this organization, those are the same. Those aren't changing. So let's reinforce those. Let's talk about all of the givens that we do have in the organization. All of those things which this stuff you can count on. No matter what happens, we're going to continue to act with integrity. We're going to continue to X. We're going to continue to Y. These are things we're going to do. So I think that's critically important. Secondly, I think it's critically important to address the unknowns and to simply note that there's a lot we don't know. I don't know how this is going to play out. I don't know when we're going to get back to the old world or to the new world too, and what that's going to look like. I don't know. I don't have those answers. So I want to be open and honest about that. Credibility is key to this thing. If you try to fake it with your employees and tell them, oh, well, look, I know everything's gonna be just fine. I'm positive everything's just gonna be fine. And you know, we got this. This is a piece of cake. You've shot your credibility. You need to be honest about where you have concerns, honest about the ambiguity that you face, honest about the concerns you have. That's going to be critical. We talked some about the financial impact of this. And then you want to talk about the process for managing the unknowns. There's a lot of things we don't know. Well, how are we going to go about this? How are we going to go about figuring out what the new world is going to look like? When you started figuring out, okay, now we're gonna open our practice in this environment of social distancing. Well, are you having people drop off the pets at the door? Are you picking them up? How are you managing relationships with owners and with animals in this environment? Well, you had to figure that out. You didn't know. Well, how did you do that? Did somebody at the top of the organization just decide? Some of it, yeah. Was it a group of folks that got together and discussed it? Some of it, yeah. But how are we going to address the unknowns? And the other part of addressing the unknowns is it's kind of cool. I've talked to multiple people that are kind of pumped. This is interesting. I got to tell you, I'm fascinated with how I'm running graduate programs at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. We had a whole bunch of in-person class things that were going on that aren't in person anymore. Well, how can I do that? How can I How can I make that a relative positive? And what are the wins? And I'm not bright enough to know what all those wins are going to be, but there are things that we're taking away from this that we're doing now because this is how we have to do them in the current environment, that may be things that we continue in the future. I have a couple of dogs, a couple of cats. My wife is very attentive to the animals. When we go to the vet, it's the curbside pickup. Then they pick them up, they do the exam, they talk to you, you get information by email, etc. Well, there's some pieces of that that may continue to work well, even when we don't have to do that due to social distancing. Maybe for some people, their physical limitations make it harder for them to come into the vet office. So you offer curbside pickup for them. Or you have a service in the future that we'll come pick your animal up, take it to the vet, we'll do our stuff, we'll drop it back off at your house, and we interact. And so you may be the one that comes up with that new service out of this thing that separates you from others. In my environment, one of my challenges is always, do I cancel a class because of a snow day? In Wisconsin, we got plenty of snow. Well, I don't have to worry about that anymore. We're going to teach everybody how to do this remote instruction thing, all the students, all the faculty. And in the future, if we got a snow day, it's not going to be a snow day, I got to cancel class. We're just doing everything. We're going to remote classroom. It's one of those little learnings that we took away. So view this as an opportunity and challenge your staff. How can we make this a win? How can we, I got to believe somebody's going to be bright enough to figure out how to make this a positive. I mean, there's huge negatives. There's thousands of people dying. I'm not trying to minimize this, but there are going to be positives out of this. We should be the ones that are bright enough to figure out what those positives are. Let's brainstorm. Let's work collaboratively together to try and figure out how we can make this a positive in the organization for the animal, for the owners of the animal, for the owners of the practice, for the employees of the practice. How can we make this a positive moving forward?
So Dale, we talked about, and you talked about at the very beginning about transparency is critical. And, you know, but how much is too much information? How do we, you know, there's a balance between too much information and maybe scaring people versus we need to tell them the realities. And I'm thinking of specifically, you know, I've had a conversation with my own staff. We had to reduce our hours by 20%. And I had a pretty challenging conversation yesterday. We had a company-wide webinar where I sort of said, like, here are the factors going into why we're having to decrease hours. And this is what it's going to take for us to back to where we need to be with revenue to increase hours. And I really felt like I was skating on thin ice because, you know, it's delicate information. You know, I'm not saying delicate in that I'm sharing financials. It's delicate because this is precarious times. And you don't want to, you just worry about maybe scaring them. I guess that's the only word. You know, sometimes the news, it can be so grim that, you know, some people are just like, wow, this is just bad. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it gets back. One of the things that I found in organizations is that I'm often in a room where we're discussing how do we deal with something? How do we deal with a particular problem or an issue? I mean, that's when a consultant like me comes in. And they'll kick around half a dozen different ways. Well, what if we positioned it this way? What if we positioned it this way? What if we did that? And it's not uncommon. At some point I say, well, hey, let's try that. What if we just did a data dump? What if we just told the truth? What if we just gave them the information without any spin, any filters? We just told them the truth. How would that work? And it's amazing how often when you think about, well, that would really work pretty well. Look, revenue of the practice is down. That's the reality. People aren't bringing their animals in. So we've had a significant decline in revenue. I don't know if you give them the exact percentage or your latest guesstimate, but I think you tell them what they already know. They can see there are fewer animals coming in the front door. That means there's less cash coming in the front door. We've had a significant decline in revenue. we want this organization to have a bright future. Remember, one of the 3 things for engagement is I need to believe the organization has a bright future. So in order to keep this organization's future bright, if we've got a significant reduction in revenue, 20%, 30%, 40%, whatever it may be, we need to find ways to reduce expenditures so that we're not bleeding cash to the point that we cannot survive throughout this challenge. So we want to find ways to cut some expenses so that we're going to be in a financial position where we can be in good shape in the long term. Leading with shared pain, I think, is really important. If, and I don't want to get too political here, but if I were the president of the United States and I were standing up and giving a speech, I would be saying, look, folks, this is bad. It's going to cost the economy. It's going to cost us all. And here's what I'm going to do. First of all, I'm not running for re-election. I'm working 24/7 on trying to solve this damn problem. I'm taking all the money we've raised from my re-election campaign. I'm donating it to people who are really hurting for this thing. I'd love to be president again, but I'm not going to run again because I need to focus on this. So I'd start with, I'm taking a hit. If I were the owner of a vet practice, I would be talking about some shared pain. Not in a, hey, I'm a martyr here, but the reality is the revenue of the practice is down. We're taking a hit as the owners of the organization. I'm decreasing my draw out of the organization. Whatever you're comfortable talking about. My wife and her 2 sisters, 4th generation owners of a printing company, they told the employees, look, we're cutting our pay 30%. We need to conserve cash, and so we're taking less cash out of the business. We're taking a hit. I think it makes sense to talk about that shared pain as part of the process. Here's what's happening to revenues. Here, we've got to do some stuff on the expense side so that we're going to have a bright future. So I would do that. But I would also talk about where this creates an opportunity. Let me hit an example, and I'm cycling this back to this question of what you share. But after 9/11, the U.S. economy definitely sputtered. And one of the companies I work for Imprint, is in the promotional products business. Well, promotional products are the kind of things that you can turn off like that when a company's hurting for cash. I mean, you just don't buy pens and hats and coffee mugs and stuff with your company logo on it. So the promotional products industry died. The number of sales was way down. So what everybody else did in the promotional products industry was lay off a bunch of staff, really cut, etc. What Imprint did, absolutely fascinating, they did not cut many staff. Now, they had some voluntary retirement, some, if you want to go to 4 days a week and cut your pay and yada, yada, they certainly did all that because they were looking to save some expenses. But then they also decided, we're going to invest. We want to be the company that's ready to jump when this thing takes off. So they invested in marketing when everybody else was not marketing. They invested in figuring out growth of the business. So here's what we're going to do in our vet practice so that when things turn around, and some of the other practices may have gone out of business, some of the other practices may have lost clientele, we want to be in a position where we have capacity, where we have reputation, where we have marketing, where we can grow the business. We want to be 20% bigger when this thing is done, 6 months after this thing is over, than we were before this thing started. And here's our plan for how we're going to grow. So there's a positive. So I think you want to give them the negative. They understand it. They know it. I don't think you can sugarcoat it. But I would talk about the decline in revenue. I talk about the decline in expenses. One of the things I find that many employees don't understand is the difference, and this will seem silly to all of you business owners, is the difference between revenue and profit. And it amazes me how many people I talk to, how many individuals working in family businesses, in small businesses, that they say, oh, we got an order. One of the companies on the board of, as I said, we make fire trucks. Well, we'll get an order in for a fire truck. Well, fire truck's a pretty expensive piece of equipment. So there's hundreds of thousands of dollars that just came in. Boy, the folks that own this business just made a few $100,000. No. We just created an opportunity where if we do a good job, we could make some percentage of that. But there's a whole bunch of expenses. Well, somehow many employees don't think about the difference between revenue and profit. So helping them understand that, look, we only pull 10, 15, 20, whatever percentage of it is to the bottom line. And what are the variables that drive that? I think is a useful thing to share with the employees of the organization.
What I did on Monday.
The other thing.
Sorry.
Yeah, Mike.
No, what I was going to say on Monday,
Go.
what I ended up doing is saying, here is the financial reality of what we're going through. And, we're lucky that our government is subsidizing 75% of salaries to keep people employed. But even with that, when little money is coming in, that we still have to put money out. So I said, our sales are here. And as long as they stay at this area, we're going to be at the 20% reduced hours. As soon as we get to this level, and we're managing our expenses well, and as soon as we get a couple of weeks at this level, then we can start thinking about bringing people back to more full-time. And what I'm going to do is once a week, I'll start sharing that little chart so you know where we are. And so if it starts to trend up, we know that that there's a good chance that you're going to get your salary back, or your hours back rather. If the trend stays flat, or it hopefully not goes down even further, well, in advance, this is where we're at. So I'm trying to be as transparent as possible. And the feedback I've gotten is people have appreciated that transparency and that honest communication.
I'm sure they do, because their fear is even worse. They're afraid for their job. Well, is the organization going to be able to survive? And you've given them the data that says, look, here's the reduction, 20%. We've done X and Y and Z. We can survive at this level. We're going to be okay moving forward. And here's, you can help me track the data and figure out when we're able to change either up or down. And I think that's an excellent approach. Now, the only thing I would note along with that is that I was working for a company, construction company, and the construction business was down. There was no doubt about it. And they basically had a wage freeze, a few exceptions, but fundamentally all of the office staff got a wage freeze because the economy was hurting. Well, one of the three owners of the business, about 2 days after they announced the wage freeze, hauled in his big ass boat that he had just bought and parked it in the parking lot to show to the employees his new boat that he was so proud of.
Ooh,
yeah.
Not a good move.
Right. And if he hadn't bought the boat, he wouldn't have given the cash to the employees, and maybe he was saving for the boat for years, and maybe he had a loan on it, but I don't know what the cash flow was in the boat. But particularly in these times, be aware of perception. So I'm a fan of being very careful about how you spend money, how you're perceived, particularly in the current environment within the community. I think about cars. I want someone who drives a nice car that looks successful, but if they're driving a really nice car, I'm thinking, man, maybe they're charging me too much. So it's a balance. One of the things I tell family businesses is that you have a nice home where you live, around where the family business employees see you on a regular basis. Maybe you have a really nice vacation place someplace out in Colorado or someplace a bit away, but don't flaunt your wealth around the employees and around the customers.
So Dale, one of the questions I received from polling on Facebook, and this is it came up a couple of places, and that is, what do we do when we have a staff member that would rather get laid off because they make more money on some of these unemployment benefits than they would working? And we've had some of these questions. I know some colleagues in Canada, but I know this question in particular came from the US. And that becomes a chatter that we're seeing on some of these Facebook groups or any kind of vet groups of, man, I have people that are leaving, not because they're worried about their health or safety, they'll make more money on unemployment. So I guess that would tie back into your three. three tiers of motivation.
Well, my comment, I would go to this, is that if you put people into a situation where they're behaving in a way that you think is bad, is stupid, I would ask the question, well, what's their motivation? And often it's because we've created a system where they have an incentive to behave exactly as they are. Now, in this case, the government's created the system, so that's a little different, but it's not uncommon. We do this in organization ourselves, is we have a dumb set of incentives. But in this case, as I understand it, absolutely within the US, you could be in a scenario where you'll make as much or more not working as you would working. And I can understand where an individual says, well, look, I can make X not working, or I can make the same number or maybe a bigger number not working as I would working. I don't want to come to work. Well, as I understand it, I'm not a lawyer, never played one on TV, but my understanding is you don't have the right as an employee to say, I'm not coming to work because I'd rather be laid off. That you only are eligible for the unemployment, and particularly the enhanced unemployment, if your employer does not have work for you. You don't have to go out and do job search, but if your employer requests that you come to work, you have to go to work. And if you don't, then you're no longer eligible for the unemployment. So I think that's the framework we're operating in. My comment to the employee would be, look, I understand your motivation, but here's the cold reality. What you're suggesting doing isn't for the common good. In this particular time of crisis, we all need to be doing what's best for the world, what's best for our friends, our neighbors, our relatives, for our countries, etc. And what's best for all of us now is to be as productive as we can. So for you to decide, I'm going to go home, I'm not going to be productive, I'm not going to do anything because I can get more money doing that than I can if I go to work and I produce, I understand the motivation, but it's a very selfish motivation. And it's not the kind of motivation that is going to help us work collaboratively to dig ourselves out of the hole that we're in. So I would appeal to the better angels in people's nature and indicate that, look, you know, I understand your motivation, but I don't think that's an appropriate way to behave. And I really want you to come to work because that's the right thing to do. And I'm going to lean on that real hard.
Yeah, I like
if that doesn't work, I'm going back to the first point I made. Yeah. So I'm going to have a hammer, but I'm going to try and appeal to their better nature. And if that doesn't work, then I'll threaten them without firing them.
So I just want to, one of the questions that we just got from the group here, and please, if anybody has a question, just go to the Q&A button and just type in your question. And it's very similar to one of the questions we had before, but I think this is a great one. So this woman is calling from Western Canada, and I'm just reading it here. All my challenges seem big. One question I have is how to keep the whole team connected when we need to stay separate. We've divided into 4 doctor teams, and I'm working only out of our satellite clinic. We're all feeling very separated. Our support staff all get along really well and are used to spending time outside the clinic doing social things, and not being able to do this has really hurt our morale. To keep saying we'll celebrate when this is better seems not enough. So I see this as a double-edged sword. On one hand, is this practice, this veterinarian has an exceptional practice where people love to be with each other, but it's really showing the dark side of this when they can't spend time together.
All right, my challenge to the practice owner would be, how can they spend time together? How can they be, terminology we've now gotten used to, how can you be together but separate? So we can't physically be in the same room, can't do that. But we as a practice have enjoyed each other's company. We get to work a little early, we spend some time chatting, we have our lunch breaks together, etc. My executive MBA, it's not just the delivery of the program, it's the time that the students spend interacting with each other. So we typically have breakfast, we have a break midday, we have a lunch break, we have a break mid-afternoon. Well, now our first pass was not doing that. Well, we are doing that again. So we start our classes at 8, but everybody logs onto the computer at 7:30. And at 7:30, we're going around talking about what we're eating for breakfast. What are you having for breakfast? What's going on in your life? So from 7:30 to 8, we're just chatting. We're just talking to each other. I make a point of interacting with all my staff at least once a week. We do this kind of video interaction where no, this isn't work. This isn't let me check on your work responsibilities. Just human to human. What have you gotten any new programs on TV you're watching? What are you watching these days? What's interesting? Have you started reading more or exercising, or how is your life different? And find ways to recreate those interactions that occurred just very normally, very naturally in the physically together in-person environment. Find ways to recreate those in the virtual world. You can do it. Ask the employees, do they want to do a video chat like this before work? Do they want to be calling each other? Do they want to start sharing things?
I can share an idea
we
that
have a sure.
I was going to say, we did something that we started this a couple of years ago, but it's really paying dividends now. And that was, we have a closed and very private Facebook group that's just for staff. And it's for staff to share fun things. It's nothing to do with work, but it's the funny calls or the cute animal or the mess that was made or something silly that was happened. And because we're the same way as this one veterinarian is describing, that we have a very tight group, but we're not seeing each other. I haven't, because of social distancing, I have literally not seen anybody in my practice in a month. And the way we're keeping connected is through this Facebook channel where funny things are posted. To the point last night, one of our receptionists posted a very funny thing last night. And for the next half an hour, 45 minutes, people from all across the practice, different locations, were all chiming in. And it put a big smile on my face because, yeah, even though we're not together, we were still connected. It was, even though it was 9 o'clock at night, it was nice.
That's the key. I think you've got a perfect example there. Find ways to do those kind of things. Find ways to do things that allow people to connect, even if they're doing it remotely.
Another question,
Absolutely.
on the same one, in terms of how do we show a staff appreciation when we don't have the money? It used to be we'd be able to give them some gift cards or send them out to Starbucks or a coffee shop. I just was about to say Tim Hortons, and all the Canadians would get it, and everybody else in the rest of the world would be going, huh? Huge coffee chain in Canada, bigger than McDonald's. But yeah, we don't have the finances. And so those fun things that we do, or the ways we would appreciate staff in the past, we're not able to do that. So, you mentioned before the praise, but is there anything else that we can be doing to show appreciation?
One suggestion, this is going to sound very trite, but write people a little note, a little letter, put something in the mail. My birthday was the other day, and a number of the staff made a point of calling and communicating, etc. But one of the staff sent me a card that came 2 days before, and it had a very nice note in it. And that was really cool. I'm home, I'm bored, I'm limiting my interaction with people. To get something in the mail, and I wouldn't do a mass mailing to everybody in the practice that everybody gets a letter the same day. And certainly I wouldn't send out the same letter, but just every day, send a letter or two to a couple of your staff. Just take a little note card. Hey, was thinking about you. I saw on the Facebook thing, whatever. I know you got parents that are older. Hope they're okay. Let me know. Is there anything I can do to help? Maybe tell a funny story about something you did that was stupid. But getting a piece of mail in the current environment could be in some ways the highlight for somebody's day.
I think what you're saying though is really, it's, even though we cannot be together, any excuse to have a personal interaction is so beneficial.
Yes. A number of the staff who work for me, work with me, have smaller children, and many of them don't have, they got nice houses and a yard, but they don't have big amounts of land. Well, I live in the country. I got 40 plus acres of land. I got a pond. I got a trampoline. I got yada yada. Well, I've offered to the staff, and one of them to take me up on it, a scavenger hunt for their kids. And so one of the women who worked for me, her and her two kids showed up one day, and I told them where the first clue would be, and they opened the clue, and the three of them analyzed the clue, and then they went to where they thought was going to be the next clue, and there was a whole series of these clues around the land, and then at the last clue, there was candy for the kids. It took me, my wife and I, 20 minutes to figure out how to do it and lay it out, and we got rid of some candy, which we probably shouldn't eat anyway. But I think it meant a lot to her that I was trying to help her figure out what she could do on the weekend with her kids that would make the weekend feel different with everybody home. And as long as I stayed in the house and they stayed outside, I didn't see any risk.
So we just got a new question, and this is I really appreciate this question because it's something that I've been facing in my own business, and many of us in different areas, we are, as veterinarians, we're considered essential services. But depending on your jurisdiction, like in Ontario where I'm at, we can only do urgent services. So it's a gray area between the vet staff and the support staff of what services we should offer, and sometimes between the vet staff. So, we had a discussion with our vets that, boy, it took 2 one-hour sessions before we could come to a consensus on it. So any suggestions on how to bridge that gap if there is a wide enough gap on that?
Well, in my mind, I think you need to be honest with the employees and you need to show integrity. I think a lot of companies in the US are really working the issue of finding a way to define themselves as an essential business. One of the companies I'm aware of makes industrial washers and dryers. Well, they sell industrial washers and dryers to lots of companies. One of the companies they sell it to is hospitals. So because they are a supplier to hospitals, they're considered an essential business so they could remain open. Well, that's nonsense. They could make all the washers and dryers in a week that they're going to sell to hospitals for the next year, store them and ship them when they need to. If you're justifying because you can find a way to weasel and do it, a broader definition of essential that really isn't essential in terms of the well-being of the animal, but is simply this will justify a revenue stream, but it is putting some people a bit at risk, I think you lose integrity in the process. So I would go with the intent of the process, of the willingness to take shared pain, as opposed to this is what we're going to do because we found a loophole that allows us to do it. Now, it's not my practice. I'm not worried about making the rent payments, etc. But to the extent that you can do that, that would be my approach.
My last question.
Take the higher road.
Yeah, no, the higher road, I think that's for sure. My last question, and that is one that has come up, I've seen it a few times, and it's one I actually noticed too, and that is everybody's upset, including clients. And so
Yes.
I am hearing more and more stories of clients just being very inappropriate, acting in an unusual way, and it's making it harder. So it's adding to the stress that we already have in our days. So any suggestions of either how do we support our staff that are having to deal with just terrible people, and I shouldn't say terrible people that are expressing their frustration. And are there any tips on how we may want to communicate this to the clients that maybe their behavior is not ideal?
Two observations, and they're a bit of a yin and a yang. I have to deal with customers that are frustrating. I've had to deal with some students that have been frustrating in this environment. I'm convinced that when I start to express my frustration that I have to deal with X, many people in those interactions make a fundamental mistake. And I think, being a bit sexist here, guys, we often do this when our spouse comes home at the end of the day and is frustrated about something in their work life and starts explaining it to us. And we far too often jump into helping solve the problem. I certainly have had to learn. My wife, as I've noted a couple times, is a fourth generation owner of a family business. Well, after we got together, she would come home at the end of the day, sometimes frustrated with her employees. Well, I help manage employees. This is what I do. Great. Feinauer consultant kicked in, and I started to explain to her what the solution was. She didn't want a solution. She wanted to vent. And so I learned to ask the question, are you talking to your husband or are you talking to the consultant? I can hold you and agree that they're idiots, or I can help you find a solution. But if I'm helping you find a solution when you just want to vent, we got a problem. Venting is a very, very healthy, important thing. So I would create space where your employees are able to vent. I'm frustrated because I was dealing with this owner. They behaved in ways that normally they wouldn't. I'm trying to be understanding. They're under stress, but it's aggravating to me. And I'm feeling like I'm getting dumped on. And I want to vent about that. And I think if we can create the space where they get to go and vent, where they get to go and express their angst at the grief that they're having to put up with, I think that's a very healthy thing for them to be able to do. So I would let your employees know it's okay to be frustrated, and if they want to vent, they can vent. Now, you don't want to go too far down this road of, generating a list of the 10 stupidest and most frustrating customers you have. That could have some PR problems in the future, but I think venting is healthy. The other thing is that there is a line. There's a point where you've simply crossed the line to being inappropriate. A number of years ago, United Airlines had a new CEO, and this is right after he'd taken over as the CEO. And he was on a United Airlines flight. Most of the United folks didn't know who he was at this point. And he was in first class, and he was just sitting there. And there was another person in first class, this is before the plane took off, was inappropriate with the steward. I think it was stewardess, was inappropriate with the stewardess, not a sexual harassment thing, but just demanding and being rude and being inappropriate. And she sort of tolerated it, but he kept pushing. And this guy said something about, hey, I think you kind of crossed the line here. And then he got a little bit more belligerent. And then the new CEO of United Airlines stood up, looked the guy dead in the eye, took some cash out of his wallet, handed it to the guy and said, "You will never fly a United Airline flight again. Get the off of my airplane." Now, how much do you think that story circulated among the stewards and the stewardesses? So at some point, yeah, you let them vent, but at some point you got to stand up for your staff. At some point you need to say, hey, there is a line. You don't need to take physical abuse. If they're, gee, it's really frustrating and the customer saying that, okay. If this has crossed the line to, you're the stupidest vet tech I've ever worked with in my life. All right, now stop. Now and where the line is going to depend on the individual. Some have much thicker skin than others, but you as the owner need to be backing them up. And look, they're customers we don't want. And if they're going to be rude and inappropriate to the staff, we'll let them go. We'll lose that customer rather than have the staff treated inappropriately. And back to how do you show appreciation? Backing up the staff that they don't have to be treated inappropriately, way more valuable than getting a gift card to the coffee place or what have you. So the two, let them vent, but also let them know there's a line. And if they feel the customer's crossed a line, here's the process. Let me know, let someone know, and we'll have a discussion with the customer. And I think on all customer communication saying, hey, we're doing the best we can in these trying times, try and be considerate of the stress we're under wouldn't be all bad.
Dale, our hour is up. That flew by. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of Oculus. We will be posting this tomorrow, the recorded version. We will be having another webinar next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm just not going to, actually, I'm going to back up and say I'm not confirming to that yet because depending on the subject, we may have to change the time. but everybody who's listened to this will get an email notification of it, including everybody who's part of our COVID-19 Resilience Guide. Dale, I really appreciate you taking the time. Please stay healthy. Please stay, I hope your family stays good, and we'll get out through this, and we'll see you on the other side of it.
All right, everybody take care. Bye.
Thanks, Dale. And on that hand, I'd like
My
to thank
pleasure.
everybody for joining us, and to everybody who asked questions, thank you. Thank you from all the people that participated all across the world. We went from Vancouver all the way to Russia and all parts in between. And so thank you all very much. And any questions, any thoughts that you have for us, just drop us a line, info@oculusinsights.net, for any kind of questions or anything that you would like us to, that you have a question that we can help you through these troubling times. Thank you.